Okay, hello everyone. Um, so we have a fascinating statement over here by Chazal. Chazal say the following. They say, Rabbi Eliezer Pasach, be Pasach le Pischa leha Parshas Mihacha, right over here. So Rabbi Eliezer opened the parsha from here. Ba'atzal Tayim Yimach HaMekare U'Shifus Yadayim Midlov Habayis. So the pasuk can literally be translated as with laziness the mekara, the sealing, or the person who is doing the sealing, meaning the one who is putting the sealing will be yimach. It will be like melted or depowered. With shiflos yadayim, and with putting down of the hands, yidlof habayis, the house will fall. And so the drasha is bishvil atzlos, because of the laziness shahayir lehem liyisrael that the Jewish people had, shaloi asku b'Torah, that they did not deal in Torah. Nasa sona'o shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu mach. So the hater of HaKadosh Baruch Hu became mach. Ve'ein mach ela ani. And mach can only mean an ani. Shneimar v'machu mirkecha. And ve'ein makare ela HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shneimar makare v'mamel Yosef. So essentially what this means is, Rashi says, Kimish lo ha'yachal lehoshia. And so what's being said over here is Rebbe Eliezer is telling us that in the times of the Megillah of Achashverosh, the Jewish people had a midah of atzlanus, and they were not Isaac Batayra. They were not Isaac Batayra. Okay, and therefore that's why Hakadosh Baruch Hu was nasa mach, meaning, so to speak, God was poor, meaning he didn't. It was as if he didn't have the ability to save the Jewish people. And that is why the Gzera got as far as it got. So, really, I think that is a very, very fascinating idea over here. We just need to understand something very simple. I mean, simply speaking, we have the other Gemara in Megillah that says that the reason why this Gzera occurred is because they were Mishtachot to the Avodah Zarah. So, and that's Meforish and Ksuvim, that's Meforish and the Psukim, that's what they did. So we have to understand what exactly are those, how those two things conflate. However, upon the examination of the pasuk which the Gemara is quoting, we have a very fascinating idea. So Rashi says in the pasuk, and someone's lazy, he doesn't fix the small hole in the ceiling of the roof. So the Rashi is saying the makar is the ceiling of the house, which is giving it its shade, and the whole shame bias is by the schach, is going to come down. Yidlov yataftef delach gesharim. Kolomar, Yisrael misatzlim b'Torah him nimakim. When Yisrael are lazy in the Torah, they become like melted. Ubeis ge'on uzam, and the house of the pride of their strength, charev, is destroyed, umach, and becomes poor. So the main thing that really bothers me here is a very interesting thing, which is, first of all, we have to understand the shaykhs. In other words, we understand we're saying that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is nasemach, or Rashi over here is saying the pasuk of the pasuk is that all of the strength and the glory and the house of the Jewish people, it becomes melted away because they're not Isaac and Torah. So we want to understand basically why that is. Meaning, okay, we understand that learning Torah is a major mitzvah saseh, and therefore if they don't do it, then it could be just like any other essay. So if they don't do a certain essay, then there's schar neinish. So what is this special idea that if they're not learning Torah, so the whole geoin, everything, the whole glory and the pride of the Jewish people is going to be melted away, or according to the Medrash and according to the Megillah, the Gemara Megillah, it's referring to Hakadosh Baruch Hu, that he's going to be melted away. We also want to know, is there a steer between those two? According to the Gemara, it's referring to Hakadosh Baruch Hu. According to Rashi and the pasuk which the Gemara is quoting, it's referring to the actual pride and glory of a Klal Yisrael. So, what's with that? Are those two things? Are they stira or not? And then the other thing that bothers me about this pasuk is that the pasuk is saying "V'shiflos yadayim midlof habayis," and essentially what that's saying is that when the Jewish people their hands become shafel, meaning they go down, meaning that they're not Isaac b'Torah, then the house will also yidlof. And l'chara, the problem is that you're not Isaac b'Torah, simply speaking, with your hands. You're doing it with your mouth. And if you'll say that it's just this pasuk, I'll show you quite a few times. Let's see. There's over here a Zohar in Bishalach, and it says like this: Tachazi, come and see. B'shal Chavi Yisrael tatam. Yisrael they went into chov. In other words, they weren't doing mitzvahs. Maxia v'yavay Amalek. V'yilachem Yisrael refidim. And again, we shouldn't be lost on you that we're also dealing with Amalek. This is the whole theme of this is Amalek, because Haman was the last descendant of Agag. So, and it says with Tat Berfidim, Berafui Yodayim. I want you to take notice of this lashon with the weakness of their hands. It says the Zayar Derafu Yedei Hain Me Araisa de Kutchabrichu. Their hands were made lazy from the Torah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Rafu Yedei Hain. It's not just a pasuk, and it's not the pasuk that's saying that. They're saying this. The Rafu Yedei Hain. Their hands are becoming weak. You don't learn with your hands. Okay, let's go weiter. The Gemara in Sanhedrin. My lashon refidim. Reb Lezer refidim. Shemar sheripui atzam edivitera. Shenamar lohifnu avos abanim mirifyon yadayim. From the rifyon of hands. Rashi mirifyon yadayim shel toira umitzvahs. V'alchanai rifyon yadayimu kolemar mipnei sherafu yedeihem min hatoira ba'aleim amalek. So again, Rashi is saying it in many words because they're reife, their hands from Torah. What is the deal with this? You don't learn Torah with your hands. It's all over. It's in the Gemara Sanhedrin. It's in the Medrash Esther. It's in the Pasuk in Koheles. It's in the Zohar. What does this mean that you're rafu yadayim min Torah? You don't learn Torah with your hands. It just makes no sense. It's very, very schwer what it's saying. As soon as I noticed this theme, immediately I was very bothered. Yeah, but also over here, it says that it says also Meretz Tanchuma. So again, Yedehem. Some people are adding mitzvahs, okay, but not everybody. So it's very hard to understand. And by the way, they're darshaning the word refidim. In other words, refidim is refion yadayim. So yad is in the word. Refidim is the location. I mean, there's the Chazal understand it's not a location, but it's this right here, this word, that when Amalek first came to fight them, it was, you break it down, refi, it's rough, meaning that they're lenient, they let off of, they're lazy with, and then yad. And then the mem is a lashon rabim. But that's what they're saying, Rifyon Yadayim. So, and that's where Amalek first fought the Jewish people, and that was because they were too lazy. They were lazying from learning Torah, and that's also why, according to Rabbi Lazar, Amalek is coming in the times of Esther. Except for he's putting in a way that since they're doing that, so then Hakadosh Baruch Hu is become too, so to speak, poor from being Moshiach. So we want to basically understand, what is he saying? How does it work that Hakadosh Baruch Hu comes Mach? Is it a steer to the Gemara, to the Rashi on Koheles? And what is this clear pattern that Chazal and the Gemara and the Zohar and the Pasuk and Koheles are obsessed with? That it's a din of Yadayim, where there's this idea of hands, when L'chara being Isaac B'Torah is not something you do with your hands, and therefore that's not what they should say at all. Only some of the Medrashes add the lashon of min mitzvahs, but Rashi on Sanhedrin Mefurish says Rifyon Yadayim min HaTorah. And we want to know, therefore, what is their obsession with that pattern? And therefore, we want to understand, what is this take on the event of of the of of the Megillah. So, in order to answer the kasha, what one has to do is one has to understand really just look at the psukim in context. And really, if you look at the psukim, it's a bit of a problem, because if you look at the psukim, it says like this: "Vayikra Shem makom masam riva al riv bnei Yisrael v'al nasoisem as Hashem lemor hayesh Hashem b'kibeinu imayin." So the pasuk says that what are the Jewish people doing? They're testing God. They're saying, is God among us or is he not? And then vayavoy Amalek vayilachim Yisrael b'fidim. So essentially, what the pasuk is attributing the coming of Amalek to was l'chayra not that they weren't learning Torah, but rather that they had a problem of belief. In other words, they didn't believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was among them. And then you have the Rashi. Rashi says it's a mashal to, I think he's quoting Chazal as well, with this famous Rashi. His Tamid Ani B'nechem Zum L'chol Tzarchechem. Said, I'm always among you, and I'm always there for all your needs. Right? So I'm going to throw myself off the back, and the dog will come and bite you, which is referring to Amalek. So the Chayr was a problem in Emunah or B'tachon. It wasn't a problem of not learning Torah. So you have now, simply speaking, a bit of a problem with understanding the simple idea of why it is that Amalek came. Did Amalek come because, this is how most people understand, this is what everybody says, that Amalek represents this idea of Safek and Keri, and that's the opposite of Emunah and Bitachon, but that shouldn't have a direct link with Rifyon Yadayim from Torah. So, essentially, that is a problem, and really, it's actually the beginning of the answer, which is that the Gemara says something very paradoxical. Gemara says, I believe it's in Kedushin, it asks a question of what is Gadol? Let's see, maybe we can even pull it up right now. So the Gemara asks, what is Gadol? Which one is greater? Maisa? Is Maisa greater? Is doing actions greater? Or is Talmud greater? Or is learning greater? And the Gemara says that learning is greater because Yeah, here we go. So the Gemara says learning is greater because Talmud Gadol Ma'aseh Gadol. Now we're talking about Ma'aseh Gadol. Now we keep on Talmud Gadol. Now we call Amur Talmud Gadol. Talmud maybe de Ma'aseh. So essentially, the Gemara here is saying something that anyone who reads it obviously thinks it's a joke. The question was, what is Gadol? Talmud or Maisa? Learning or action? And the answer was, learning is greater, Talmud Gadol, because learning brings to action. Well, if learning is only greater because it brings to action, then that means that action is greater. Because the only reason why learning is greater is because it brings to action. So how can it be the reason that learning is greater? I hope this is not too complicated. The Gemara is saying that Talmud is Gadol, Talmud Mevli de Maisa. That's what everyone agreed on. So essentially, the Gemara Shaila was, what's greater, learning or doing Maisim of mitzvos? Answer, learning is greater because learning brings to Maisim mitzvos. Question, if learning is only greater because it brings to Maisim mitzvos, how could learning be greater to Maisim? How can learning be greater than Maisim mitzvos? L'chara, you're saying that it's only greater because it brings to it. If it brings to it, that means it's only a hechsher. It's only a stepping stone to it. So how can it be greater than it? Because it's bringing to it, meaning to the Ma'aseh mitzvahs. And the answer lies in, we spoke about this in the past, but this is l'chara, the underlying theme of this lashon of Chazal that I've repeatedly shown and proven, that they're saying this idea of rifyon yadayim min ha-Torah, which is the laziness of hands from the Torah. And what Chazal are saying, and this is what the Chazal is saying in Kedushin, I think, and it's a very, very intuitive, correct understanding, is like this. Everybody knows that Maisim, actions, do not have any self-contained impact or meaning. Rather, Maisim are always going to be defined by the kavana and the context within which they're done. What's an example? Even our situation is a perfect example. If I would say, is the action of murder bad? Is it evil? So someone will say, yeah, of course, the action of murder is bad and evil. But what about Amalek? When you kill, if someone kills an Amaleki, that's a mitzvah. What about a rodef? What about if someone is chasing to kill you? Torah says, hashkem v'hargoi. That's a mitzvah. So suddenly, the action of murder is now a good thing. And vice versa. If someone can give tzedakah, if he gives it in a manner in which it embarrasses the person, that could be a negative thing. If someone, the actions do not carry any inherent self-meaning at all. Rather, their impact is defined based on the context in which they are done. Therefore, what am I saying? When someone learns Torah, and their Torah, like we spoke about in the past, la'asok b'divrei Torah, means, not lilmod divrei Torah, means to deal. Dealing means that it's real to you. What that means is that now, when a person does the actions that he does, he is doing them in context of the reality of the development and expression of what he is. Because he learned Torah, he understood God's ratzon, he has a connection on a real level to what God wants through the learning of his Torah, and now the action that he does is an expression of his Talmud. And this is the entire yesod of Yiddishkeit and of Oisik B'Torah and of Yirah Shamayim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not want Maisim. He wants a person to go on a derech, on a path. And that path is a path in which a person does maisim as expressions of the reality of what he is. We paskin mitzvahs tzrichas kavana. Kavana is the reality of a connection between the inner being that you are and the actions that you're doing. We paskin mitzvahs deraisa require kavana. If you don't have kavana, you're not yoytze. And that means that outer maisim have to be expressions of inner sentiments and inner perspectives and inner ideas. If they're not considered mitzvahs. And this is the idea, because the reality of what we do as people and the ma'asim mitzvahs that we do and the good things that we do have to be expressions of our underlying ratzon to be in a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to relate to Him and to want to develop and get closer to Him. And if they're not that, then the ma'asim are not valuable, and therefore that's why the Gemara in Kedushin says that everyone agrees that Talmud is Gadol, because what's the definition of Gedula? Gedula doesn't mean it's better than that, it's greater than that in the sense that we think Gedula is. Gedula means what has a more underlying and encompassing consequence to the development of the human being. So if I ask you, should I learn? Is learning going to make a bigger impact on the reality of what I am? Or is Maisa going to make a bigger impact? Answer, learning. Because learning is more basic and more encompassing for the development of a human being than actions are. Because actions do not carry inherent connotations of development, meaning they're not necessarily going to develop you, because they require context for them to be poyel, for them to have, in order for an action to have a reishim on the reality of the person who is doing them, they had to have been an expression of a genuine desire of him, and that action to have been an expression of what that person is, and a perspective that he has. And that perspective can only come through learning Torah. That's why the Mishnah Avos says, Ein bor yerei chet. A bor, someone who is a novice and doesn't know anything, can't be a yerei chet. He can't fear sin. And therefore, this is why it says that Rafu Yedehem min HaTorah. This is the entire Yisrael. This is why Chazal are obsessed with this language. They weren't Rafu Sichleihem, their heads from the Torah, not Pihem from the Torah. They Rafu Yedehem min HaTorah, meaning that their hands did not, their maisim were not expressions of the reality of the Torah in which they were learning. And that is because they did not have Yiras Shamayim. And the Gemara in Shabbos says, it's nebach to a person if he learns Torah and he doesn't have Yiras Shamayim. It's like making a gate to an oitzer. It's like making a gate to a locker and a storage house, but there is nothing in the storage house. Because Yiras Shamayim and learning Torah, let's see if we can pull that one up. It says Yiras Shamayim hi oitzaroi. Here we go. Gemara in Shabbos. Amar Rava. Right. Okay, there is different Gemara that I'm referring to, but essentially, so when you B'shash when you al madin, and after 120. So Emuna, you did business with Emuna. Kvati Matara, Sag Pei Rivia, Tipisa Yeshua, Papata Bachachma, if I done with the Davar, did he do all these things? I feel hachi. E Yereshmaim Yetzara in. Eloi, Loi. So what is it saying? And the Gemara says a mashal that it's like someone who asked someone to bring a kor chitin, which is a measurement of wheat, and they brought it up to him. Amarlo, a ravtli ben kav chaimton. Did you mix with it? A Rashi says kav chaimton is eret melecha. It's like a certain salty substance. Amarlo lav. Amarlo mutavim lo yelisa. So essentially, what's being said is that here you go. The Kohen Sheish B'Torah Ve'im B'Yireh Shamayim. During the Gid Baruch Maftechos Apnimiyos Maftechet Zechizeres Lo Yimoserulai. So you can't. The Yireh Shamayim is a gate, is an outer gate to the gate of Torah. And essentially, what is that saying? That's saying what we're talking about. What we're talking about is that the Yesod of this Atli Yisrael Shali Askabat Torah means. Doesn't mean that Israel didn't have yeshivas. Doesn't mean they didn't have Sanhedrin. They did have a Sanhedrin. Doesn't mean any of that. It means that they did not have their yadayim, their maisim. They did not have yiras shamayim, an awareness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that was seen by the fact that they were not Isaac B'Torah, meaning that when they learned Torah, those perspectives did not lead to actions that were expressions of that inner perspective that they achieved through learning Torah. Why? Because they had no Yirah Shamayim. So if a person doesn't have a regard, an awareness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and a fear of him, and he learns Torah, so there's nothing for that Torah to do. It can't be poil on him. It can't create within him a perspective so that he can now use that perspective to do something so that the action can be an expression of what he is. And therefore, there is no way for his Torah to ever translate into self-development. And I hope these terms are not very esoteric. If someone is sitting and they're learning Torah, the intellectual part of it, and they learn Hashem wants this, or Hashem says this is a perspective that you have to have, and they don't have regard, they don't fear HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they don't say that, and they don't believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is existing in their lives, real, interacting with them, and they don't have a relationship with him, then the fact that something was said about HaKadosh Baruch Hu's will not create an emotional perspective that they can act upon so that the actions that they do will be a genuine expression of the selves that they have built. And if an action that you do is not an expression of a genuine self that you have built, it's not worth anything. I think that's very intuitive on a basic psychological level. I hope I'm not saying something that's way too, I'm very against using cliche terms. This is very, very basic thing. And therefore, now we have this understanding. Now we can learn this Medrash Rabbah, this Medrash Tanchuma, and we can see the Medrash Tanchuma is actually being mitzaref the two. B'shar sheba Amalek, right over here. When Amalek came, Arash liyulachim in Yisrael, maksiv sham, vayilachim Yisrael rafidim, marafidim, shafay demeter and mitzvahs. And then it says, re'ei maksiv sham. See what it says there. Ve'yikroshim malko masam riba. Hisla HaKadosh Baruch Hu tzovech lifneim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is screaming in front of them. Ad masai atem menasem oisi. Ad masai atem meriva noisi. Until when are you going to test me? Until when are you going to fight with me? V'af Moshe tzovech. Mata yevin madi, mata nasunas Hashem. So, the Medrash Tanchuma is like connecting these two things. It's saying, oh, they're Rafid Yem Torah, and then also see what it says there. Re'ei maksiv sham. How are those two things connected? How does the fighting have to do with the Torah? Answer what we're saying. that since they were Raf Yadayim in a Torah, they lacked an inherent awareness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They didn't have Yireh Shamayim. They didn't see Him in their lives as a real entity that they can relate to and rely upon. Therefore, their Torah was not connected to their Yadayim. Their Rafayim Yadehem Mina Torah. Therefore, they fought with God. And therefore, it's not a stira to the Rashi. And by the way, this pshat comes out to be in the most beautiful way, the idea of how it was that Moshe Rabbeinu was help them winning the war. And I think this is mamish alibud emes. It's so beautiful because it says in the pasuk that what did Moshe do? He went up to the thing. He went up to the mountain, to the rock, and it says Vayhi Yadav Emunah Adboy Hashamesh. I'm telling you, you can't make this up. This is literally what the Torah is saying. Torah HaKadoshah is beautiful. It says Moshe's hands, Yadav. It's not a coincidence. You think it's a coincidence? Rafu Yedehem Mina Torah, and Moshe's Yadayim were Emuna, and Emuna is the exact thing which they were missing, which is why they were fighting with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Vahi Yadav Emuna Adboy Hashamesh. What is that saying? And like the Gemara says, Rashi is quoting it. Rosh Hashanah. What does the Gemara over there say? The Gemara says, "V'chiyadav shel Moshe Isis Melchama." Here it is. It's a Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah. Are the hands of Moshe doing war? When the Jewish people were looking upwards, meaning, if the Jewish people had an awareness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they were meshaber themselves to their father in Shabbat Shemayim, meaning they had Yireh Shemayim, which is our entire point, which is the whole yesod of Rafa Yadayim in Torah. And therefore it's Vahi Yadav Emunah Bo'Hashamesh. Moshe's hands had Emunah. What does that mean? His hands were Emunah. So obviously there's the Pashim shot, but with Derech, what we're saying, it's so beautiful. Moshe's hands. It was Moshe's hands. Moshe's hands were Klape Maila. He was praying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, bringing awareness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu into the world. The Jewish people saw that. They themselves also were Meshabed their hearts to Hashem, and therefore they won the war against Amalek. And that is the entire yesod of the idea of the concept of Purim, which is what? Which is Kiyamu Mashikiblu Kvar. Can someone explain how is it possible that they were re-accepted, they're re-makabel what they already were, they're re-makayim Mashikiblu Kvar? What does that mean? If Klal Yisrael, that's the famous lashon of Chazal. If Klal Yisrael already accepted the Torah, so they already accepted it. So what do you mean they were makayim it now? Rather, since it says Yireh Shamayim hi oitzaroi, that the oitzar, an oitzar is a storage house for Torah, is Yireh Shamayim, and like the Gemara in Shabbos says that since HaKadosh Baruch Hu is koife aleim har tegigis, HaKadosh Baruch Hu put the mountain on them, and he forced them to accept the Torah, which the Maharal says that means that since HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealed himself, and when HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealed himself, he revealed to everyone, he revealed on Har Sinai that there was nothing that existed besides for him, and no other truth existed besides for him. Therefore, Klal Yisrael couldn't physically They didn't have the actual capability of denying the Torah. If a person, if Hakadosh Baruch Hu comes down and shows you that everything that he's saying is the only possible truth, mentally you cannot possibly deny it. You just can't. You're being shown it's the truth. It's like saying, do you deny gravity and putting an object and letting it deny gravity? You can't deny it. Experientially, you can't. And Maharal explains that Kafale Markihigis means Hakadosh Baruch Hu said, "You're going to accept the Torah." They said Nashma and Ishma, and then Hakadosh Baruch Hu reveals it. So it's hard to gigis. Hakadosh Baruch Hu reveals reality to them, which means what are they chaser then? Their chaser yira shemayim, their awareness of the Torah and the makar of their relationship with Hakadosh Baruch Hu did not come from an internal awareness that they had of God. Rather, what did it come from? Hakadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, he Maharal uses the lesson of ma'anis. Hakadosh Baruch Hu was ma'anis then. He forced it upon them by revealing the underlying reality. And therefore, even though they were makabel the Torah, so yes, Klal Yisrael had the Torah. Yes, it's part of the definition of what they are. But it's not kayam. It has no oitzar. And the Gemara calls it in Shabbos, Maida'a Rabba La'araisa, that there is an excuse that they had. The Jewish people had an excuse all the way from Kabbalah Satira, all the way until Purim. The Jewish people had an excuse because the Kafalei Marki Yigigis, and now they accepted the Torah again from their own accord. What does it mean from their own accord? It means because they achieved Yiras Shamayim. That is what it means, and there is zero question about that. And that is what it means, Kinu Kiblu Kvar. Otherwise, you don't have Pshat. What is Pshat? What does that mean? They were already Makabal. So now they're re-Makabal, they're already Makabal, so it's Vaiter Kabbalah. So who cares? What does that mean? It has no meaning. But now, according to what we're saying, that's the Pshat. They had, since they now were inspired and they had a Yiras Shemayim, that Yiras Shemayim was a Kiyum. It made it last. It gave it an Oitzar to their Talmud Torah, to their learning, to their relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to their inner realities, to their inner inspiration, to their selves, to their identities. And therefore, it's Kiyamu, they're Mekayim, Mashikiblu Kvar, which I think is absolutely beautiful and gorgeous. Now, just to go back and to answer the actual Lashon of the Gemara that we were discussing in the Megillah, the Gemara says that it's the Nasa Shoinish HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mach. He becomes poor. Now, what does that mean? What that means is the following, and this is also a very, very fascinating aside. That means Rambam says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu never changes. The extent to which HaKadosh Baruch Hu protects and is involved in someone's life depends solely on the extent that that person puts himself in the reshus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, i.e., he has Yiras Shamayim. So, therefore, what does this mean? Obviously, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is able to save them. So what does it mean? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is made as if he couldn't save them. It means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is only going to operate with a person, is only going to relate to that person to the extent that they relate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a Midah and Hashgacha. For sure, according to the Rambam, it says Mefurish this, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Hashgacha changes from person to person, different levels. If someone puts himself in the Rishus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and someone has an awareness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and relates to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and davens to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to have a higher level of Hashgacha on him. And therefore, when the Jewish people were marchik themselves from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they decided to not learn Torah and to not have their hands as an expression of their Torah and to not have Yira Shemayim. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu was made, so to speak, as if he couldn't be Mashiach, because it's chutz midarkei hashgacha. If you don't involve HaKadosh Baruch Hu in your life, and you don't say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I trust in you, I want you to save me, I want you to help me, I want you to do this for me, with me, for me, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not going to do it. And it's a whole different level of hashgacha. And there's no question about that. If a person says, okay, I'm just going to, do my job thing, I'm going to do this, I'm going to have this thing, that's my... If HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not your source, so that's not how he's going to treat you. And since the Jewish people at that time did not treat that HaKadosh Baruch Hu that way, it was Yoitze from the Midas Hashgacha. It would have been a violation of the way that Hashgacha works for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to have saved them. Which is why they needed to do the Tainus Esther and need to be Isaac B'Torah in order for them to be returned back into the Rishus, so to speak, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu.